Welcome to the second interview of a brand new section of the channel where I interview computer gaming and tech leaders from the golden era of the computer revolution. Many viewers are aware of just what an impact the game Duke Nukem had on my life, and there are numerous other 3D Realms and Apogee titles from the 90s that I have very fond memories of. Well, today I am very pleased to welcome the founder of Apogee Software and 3D Realms, Scott Miller. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, Jesse. Glad to be here.
So I'll start with your bio. Scott Miller is a video game industry pioneer, a designer, programmer, and entrepreneur, best known for founding Apogee Software in 1987, which later became 3D Realms. He pioneered the concept of shareware, giving away the first episode of a game for free with the opportunity to purchase the full game. He produced and or co-designed numerous incredible hits, including Wolfenstein 3D, Rise of the Triad, Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, and Max Payne, among many others. It is a great honor to welcome Scott Miller. Welcome to the channel. So we had lunch recently, and I thought the stories you told me would be greatly appreciated by the audience. So we'll start out with you founded Apogee in 1987. What led you to that point in your career?
I was going to college and learning, getting my computer science major and just teaching myself how to code, and I was writing games on the side. So yeah, I was just writing games and trying to find a way to also make money with them. And I'd send a couple of games out to like the disc magazines that were around at the time, like Big Blue Disc and Software. Soft Disc was one of them. And I was getting like $100 per submission, when they published my game, which was pretty good money for me back then. I liked it. It was great. But the rights would come back to me after they published the games, and I was thinking, what else can I do to make money? And that's when I had the idea of releasing these games online as shareware, and that's kind of when the company really took off. So, like, I released my Cross games as shareware, and like that first year, I think I made $150,000, from people just sending me checks in the mail, which, who would do that nowadays? No one. But
And how old were you at the time?
Young 20s.
Awesome. Yeah.
And so, yeah, people were sending me money, and I was going to college, but I kind of figured out that I had something special on my hands here that I discovered with this shareware trilogy method. And so I dropped out of college my senior year, and with the idea of really putting all my time and effort into growing the company. And I knew I couldn't write games fast enough, so I started looking online to see if I could find other people who were writing games and putting them online. And I found a couple of people, and they weren't using the shareware method. So when I reached out to them, I said, hey, I'm pretty sure you're not making much money with your method where you just release the whole game online and expect people to send you money. Who's going to do that? So my method was simply release like a third of the game. And then if you want the other 2 episodes, you'd have to send me some money. So I ended up recruiting some people, like, for instance, Todd Repogel, who later was, one of the co-creators of Duke Nukem, just a brilliant young coder and designer. And I also reached out to John Romero while he was working at SoftDisk. And after quite a few letters back and forth, finally convinced them to give shareware a try. It's crazy. In the beginning, they didn't think that, you could make money in shareware, but so what they did is they said, all right, fine, we'll write your game, but you need to put up some money first. And they said, how about $2,000? And I said, sold.
Which game was that? The very first one?
The Commander Keen.
All right.
So the reason I was so excited about working with them is that when I did reach out to John, at first he thought I was some sort of crank, just sending him weird fan letters and stuff. But he finally.
And it wasn't under your real name, right?
Yeah, because I was actually having to send him letters at SoftDisk where he worked, and I knew that if I made a proposal to work for me, then SoftDisk wouldn't pass those letters on to him. So I had to pretend like I was a fan, and I had to pretend like I was finding bugs in his code, in his games that were appearing on SoftDisk. And I was like, John, man, I love your game, but I found some bugs. Contact me directly, and I'll tell you what the bugs are." And he wasn't contacting me until finally he realized that all of these letters that were posted on his wall were from the same guy. So he reached out to me actually with a very angry letter, but the main thing was I was able to get in touch with him, explain why I did that. And he was kind of intrigued. So he sent me this demo that he had put together with John Carmack. That was a smooth scrolling demo of Mario that they had submitted to Nintendo, but Nintendo didn't show any interest. But it was the first smooth scrolling, pixel smooth scrolling demo I'd ever seen on the PC. It was really kind of a breakthrough. And they said they would use that technology, that engine. We weren't even calling it an engine back then. But they said they would use that technology to write this game called Commander Keen, which Tom Hall had come up with like in an afternoon really quickly. So I sent them the check for $2,000 and we were off to the races. And, a couple months later, the game was finished. I released it to the online, to shareware on BBSs and everything. This was really before the internet was a thing. There was no, web browsers or anything. So I had all these websites I had released it to. I had a big mailing campaign where I sent it off to shareware distributors around the world. And I set up my answering machine to start taking orders because I was actually going to go away on a weekend ski trip with some friends. And I came back and the tape had run out on my answering machine. There was like over 100 orders on there, and which kind of blew my mind. And so I had to, and the phone was still ringing when I got home. So I very quickly realized this was going to be a much bigger hit than my Cross games. And so I had to immediately hire some people, like my mom and a friend down the street, to start taking orders on the phone.
So your mom was employee number one.
Pretty much, yes, exactly.
That's awesome.
And I also, I realized, I need to find an office where I can hire people and start taking phone orders and everything. So it just really took off. Commander Keen really took off. That game started, I think the first month it made like $10,000. After that, it was making $25,000 to $35,000 a month. And the id guys, they called themselves id right before they released Commander Keen. They decided to quit SoftDisk and become a game studio. And so the original founding members of SoftDisk, of id, they left and they started working on the next Commander Keen games. And and meanwhile, I'm also talking to other shareware authors. I brought aboard a guy named Jim Norwood, who eventually went on to do Biomenace and also Shadow Warrior. So I was growing the company every which way I could. We were hiring phone people, trying to find new developers, and I picked out an office location, started growing that. So yeah, it just kind of really just took off.
So tell us about Wolfenstein. How did that come to be?
Well, after id Software developed the second Commander Keen trilogy, Goodbye Galaxy, and Aliens Ate My Babysitter, those games.
Which is my favorite one, by the way.
They were planning on making a third Commander Keen trilogy, but John Carmack was also working on 3D gaming technology, and he had done a little game called Hover Tank, and then a game called Catacombs. They were still submitting these games to SoftDisk, even though they weren't officially working there. They still had like a contractual agreement to make several more games for SoftDisk. So, I was going over to id's offices. They had moved down to Dallas, Texas, or Mesquite, Texas, and they had they were all in this one apartment complex, and they had one apartment that was set up just to be their offices. And it was really cool. It had a loft and everything. And So I was going there quite often. I was seeing all the stuff being made. And when I saw Catacombs, I was like, guys, this technology is really amazing. Can we do a shareware game based on this? And they said, well, they still have an obligation to do one more game for soft disk. And I pitched to them the idea of, well, why doesn't Apogee make that game for soft disk, and you guys instead focus on a 3D game for Apogee? And so we came to agreement on that, and they began work on Wolfenstein. And me and my partner George, at the time, we had our own little game engine. It was like a little side-scrolling engine, and George did most of the work on it. And he made a game called Scuba Venture, which then was submitted to Softdisk as if it was like an id Software game. And id Software made Wolfenstein for us, which took like 5 or 6 months or so. And then we released Wolfenstein, and that game kind of changed the world. It really introduced the whole idea of a first-person shooter to the world.
Yeah, I still remember playing it for the first time. I think I was 11 or 12 years old, and so it was quite a game changer. I remember just being mesmerized because I was playing Mario Brothers before that, and then suddenly I'm in this 3D world on a PC. It was definitely a game changer. I'd like to talk a little bit about Duke Nukem 3D and spend some time there. So who came up with that idea? How did the project come to be?
Well, I mean, we'd already, working with Todd Repogel, who I recruited early. He was one of the first people I recruited late in 1990. He had already done some games for us, like, what was it? Can't remember the first one off my Caves of Thor. He did. Then he did Dark Ages, and then we did Monuments of Mars. And these were all like CGA games, which 4-color games nowadays. Very simple games. And then it was time to go to EGA, and that's when we did the first Duke Nukem game, which was originally going to be called Heavy Metal. That's what Todd wanted to call it. And I wasn't a big fan of that name. So I said, why don't we name it after the main character? Because the main character was already in the game, kind of doing flips and looking really cool. And so I said, I really like the name Duke. And he came up with the name Nukem. I said, well, there we go. We got a name. And so the game ended up being called Duke Nukem. And then that came out and did really well. It was our second best game ever. And then he did a game called Cosmo, which had a Duke Nukem cameo in it, Easter egg in it. And then Duke Nukem 2. And then by that time, we had started talking to a coder named Ken Silverman, who was working on a Doom-like 3D engine.
And I'm going to try to get Ken on in the next few weeks, too. I've been talking with him.
Yeah, he'd be awesome to get on. And he could fill in a lot of details I've probably forgotten. But so Ken had this prototype 3D engine, and we had worked out a deal to where we would license the engine from him and start developing games based on it. This was, Doom had come out and really shown the world that 3D was here to stay, and it was the coolest thing ever. So we wanted to have our own 3D engine, and we were going to use Ken's technology. So it was just like an obvious thing to do to make Duke Nukem 3 into Duke Nukem 3D. I mean, it was just the natural thing to do. We had the engine. We were going to do Duke Nukem 3 because Duke Nukem 1 and 2 were very popular games for us. So it was kind of just a no-brainer to do the game. And so Todd Repogel quickly, learned the engine and started doing prototype stuff. And that's how that game, got rolling. And we had the build engine game. And so we also wanted to kick off other projects, because it was like, why just do one? So Jim Norwood, who had finished up with Biometis, and Frank Madden, who had finished up with a game called Monster Bash for us, they decided to team up and work on Shadow Warrior because they were really into all the ninja karate stuff and that whole lore. So they worked together on Shadow Warrior. I started working with Nick Newhard, who lived in California, and he wanted to do a scary game. So he pitched us the idea of a game called Blood. And then there was another team who wanted to work with us, and they started working on a game called Ruins. Ruins. Yeah, Ruins. And that ended up getting released as Power Slave. So yeah, with Blood and Power Slave, we ended up at some point letting those two developers sign with another publisher because we just had too much on our plate, and we stuck with Shadow Warrior and Duke Nukem to do internally ourselves.
So Duke Nukem 3D, you pretty much already had the same team from the 2D versions. Did you add anyone else, and how did you build that team up?
Yeah, originally that was a small team until we realized that making a 3D game would need more people, obviously, and so that's when we brought in other developers to help out, like artists and level designers. Like we brought in, Alan Blum was already a level designer on the game. He had worked on Duke Nukem 2. We brought in Richard Gray, who's known as Level Lord. And we brought in other artists. So yeah, we filled out the team. We also ended up bringing in a dedicated producer, Greg Malone, who helped out the last 10 months of the project. So yeah, by the time that game was done, we probably had 8 or 10 full-time people on it.
Awesome. Well, that game and your decision to include the build engine tools on the CD really had a profound impact on my life, as I've told you. And thank you for doing that. I mean, it really was. I was a lost kid, like many kids are, and I as a late teenager, and I remember just burying myself in the build engine and tearing it apart and making total conversions, and it affected my life twice, as you know. Where once I made a TC of my high school where I ripped the Nazis out of Rise of the Triad, and I put them into the build engine game, and I mapped out my whole school, and I finished it about a week before Columbine happened. So wow. It wasn't, and I had a principal that was not the most supportive, and he seemed to make it a quest to make an example of me, and I actually got expelled for the semester for it. There were no teachers or students in the game. You were blasting Nazis trying to save the school, but you had a different experience in high school, as I recall. Tell us about that. When you were sneaking into the lab.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I was actually going to high school in Australia. I was 15 years old, and our school got this new Wing 2200 PC. And it had like a built-in floppy drive. It had a printer off to the side. It had a built-in screen, built-in keyboard. So it was really, I think, the first integrated PC of its time that was suitable for home or office use. And so somehow our school got one of these, and I ended up taking a computer class as an elective, and it was the only class in high school I ever failed. I got a D on it because awesome. I just at the time I just saw the computer as like this glorified calculator. I didn't really understand what was cool about it or anything. But so after that class, after that class was done, and I didn't do so well in it. Thank goodness it was just an elective, so it didn't really hurt me much. But I had friends who were like after school saying, "Hey, we're going to go by the computer lab to play a game." And I was like, "What do you mean play a game?" And they were like, "Yeah, we can play games on the computer." And so apparently some of my friends had typed in some games that they had seen in a magazine and were playing these games, and you could save them on the floppy disk and come back and play them anytime you wanted to. So I went to the class. Apparently, the computer room was open for like 9 minutes after school each day. So I went up there and I saw them playing games, and the light bulb went off my head to go, oh, now I like computers, because, I'd been playing a couple arcade games at the arcades, the super simple ones like Pong, and here this computer could play a game. And not only that, my friends were modifying the games to do something unique. And so that just really got me hooked on it. And so, I definitely at that point, became like this computer nerd and was wanting every second I could on this computer. In fact, I couldn't get enough time because the school would close the computer lab, like around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So what I started doing is I started to unlatch the window to the computer lab. That way at night, I could sneak into the computer room and, keep on coding and having fun and really kind of, leveling up my knowledge and just making games and so on. Well, anyway, a few weeks later, I got discovered, but by that time, I'd already written some really, kind of cool games that you could do on that thing. And so I got called to the principal's office, and they had done a printout of my floppy drive. And the computer teacher was there, the one that gave me the D, and he was looking at my stuff. And and the principal said, you've done something really bad here because you broke into the computer lab, but you haven't done any harm. And and our teacher's very impressed by what you did. So the principal said, well, I'm going to make you a deal. And he slid the key to the computer room across the desk to me. He says, you got all the access you want to the computer room, but if the teacher has any questions about how to do something, you got to help them out. So,
awesome.
I went from feeling like I was about to be expelled, to like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And so, yeah, I spent a lot more time in that computer room. And then eventually I moved back to the United States because I graduated high school there. And, I bought, I started buying, I bought like a Commodore PET and then the Commodore VIC-20 or the Commodore 64, I should say. And then the Amiga 1000, the IBM PC. So I was trying to keep up with all the latest computer stuff and, just constantly learning on my own and everything. And yeah.
It's I too was quite the nerd, and my favorite place to hang out in high school was the computer lab, and there's been a lot of changes since then. I went to visit my old high school. I hadn't been there in 25 years, and I went to see. First thing I wanted to see was the computer lab, and I walked in, and I was so sad. They cut the size of it in half, and there were just a fraction of the number of computers. And I asked the teacher in there. I said, "Hey, are there?" I was in there every morning. I'd get to school early and hang out there. I got permission from some of my teachers of elective classes to go there instead, and I'd hang out there during the day and after school. And it was a big group of nerds in the 90s that were hanging out there. And I said to the teacher, I say, hey, where are all the kids? This is school hours, or does anybody hang out there, hang out in this lab? And he said, no, nobody ever hangs out in there. And I'm like, what the heck? Where are the nerds at? And it gets even worse that I talked to somebody else in another district, and they said that they actually closed down all of their computer labs and they just hand out Chromebooks. And so it's just changed so much. And just technology wise, kids are, I don't know, buried on their phones and disconnected. And I mean, it was really fun. We still have some of those nerds that I hung out with, fellow nerds, I should say, that I hung out with. We still have, we got back together, and we started holding retro LAN parties. I've shown you a few of the videos that we've done of Duke matches on original hardware. But yeah, there's a social aspect to gaming. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the other changes, particularly in the industry. You have had an extensive career. You're still in the industry. What changes have you seen over the decades?
Gosh, where do I begin? There's so many. I mean, one of the defining things for us in the 90s was it was a race to build better technology. Back then, it was always on the forefront. And then Epic came along with their Unreal Engine. We had our build engine, and then we were working on an engine for a game called Prey. So it was always this race to try and build the better technology, because technology was such a big selling point in the 90s. And then in the 2000s, that became, far less important. It started shifting more towards just the gameplay mattering. Unreal became sort of a de facto engine for the industry over time. And now we have Unity also. So engines aren't really the thing anymore. We don't care about making an engine. there's engines we can use out there. So that's a huge change. And on the free to play side, that's also another huge change. Lots of games like Fortnite and most mobile games, survive off being free to play, but you can obviously spend money in those games, and that those games make a lot more money being free to play than they would be being something that you paid for, and or subscribe to, like World of Warcraft did. So that's a huge change. And another, really in the last 4 or 5 years, another big change is that because these engines are so easy to use now, the tools are, and the engines, there's just so many more games being developed nowadays than there used to be. And that's really making it harder to get your game noticed. I think in the last 12 months, there's been over 20,000 games released just on Steam alone. And in the 90s, that would have been more than all the games released the entire 90s. So back in the 90s, it was if you made a decent game, if you made a good game or a great game, you had a hit on your hands, you were going to do really well, and your studio was going to easily survive. Nowadays, that's not the case. There's a lot of really successful, or I don't want to say not successful, but really well-made games that are not making enough money for their studios to survive. Just because there's just so many games out there, it dilutes the attention. Where
do you see it heading as an industry?
Well, we've already seen a lot of shakeout happening. There's been, I think in the last several years, there's been at least 15 to 20,000 people laid off. Microsoft, I think just recently laid off several thousand people, right? Was it
something like that? Yeah.
I mean, it was, I had a lot of friends who were part of that layoff. And what's happening is that the major studios now are moving away from developing new IP because it's too risky for them. And they're just going to basically keep churning out sequels of existing IP. So everyone's, the big studios are in play it safe mode for sure. And it's really up to the indie level studios to create new IP. Because I just don't think it's going to come from the big studios anymore.
There's a lot of talent out there, and as you said, the tools are readily available. So even though there's a lot of noise, there's some good stuff coming out on the indie circuit. Tremendous, really great stuff that I'm seeing.
There's a lot of good stuff, but it's not making as much money as it would have made even 5 years ago.
Right.
And that's a problem, because even on the indie side of things, some of these games are costing a lot of money. Like, we're putting in several $100,000 up to $500,000 in some of our projects. And, if we don't make it back, that's going to really hurt our studio.
It's tough to have any overhead. I mean, there's such little margins that if you have large payroll, but that's another thing with the technology too. It makes things easier with where people can work overseas and they can talk like we're talking, and that stuff wasn't available 30 years ago.
Yeah, and that's definitely the case for our studio, to keep the costs low. Everyone works from home. We have over 100 people who are helping with all of our projects, our 10 projects in development, and most of them actually work outside the United States. We're able to find talented people from all around the world and not have to worry about visas to relocate them or any of that kind of stuff, or paying for office space. In the 90s, we didn't do it that way. When we found someone who was really good, who lived, let's say, in Europe, we would find a way to bring them to our offices in the United States. And it was a very costly and time-consuming process. And plus, we had to pay for office space. So we don't have to do that anymore. So that's a big cost savings there.
Tell me more about your current studio. So you relaunched Apogee a few years ago, and what are some of the current things you're working on?
Well, our big project that's going to be coming out at some point soon, we haven't announced an exact date yet, is Total Chaos, which is a horror game. And we have a couple of games that we're really excited about that are in early access that should be coming out to their 1.0 release in a few months, like Questmaster, Below the Stone. So, I mean, we have a lot of games. Vexlands, which is this cozy little casual game that you can get. There's a demo for that right now, and we're hard at work getting that game finished for next year. We have several games that we haven't announced yet. We just released our Lucid demo, which is a platformer game that's gotten just great reviews from press and players alike. And so we're all over the map with our games. And we do about half our games are being developed by external studios that we have like a publishing deal with, and about half our games are being developed internally, where we came up with the ideas themselves and we're putting the team together. This is really how we operated in the 90s. We worked with outside studios like Remedy for Max Payne, Human Head for Prey, id Software on their things, but we also did our internal games like Rise of the Triad, Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, and a bunch of others. So we like that hybrid model to where we work with really promising outside studios, but we also develop our own stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to checking out some of the what's yet in store. Last question that I have, we've all heard of Duke Nukem and some of the larger titles, but in your across your career, what are some titles that maybe you're particularly proud of that didn't receive as much attention as you think should have, that we should check out?
Our good games got really good attention, and so I don't really know if we had any like hidden gems that didn't get discovered. One game that people don't really know that we were involved with in kicking off is a game called Descent, where that game, we originally signed up the team to do it and help formulate the idea, and we worked with that team for the first, like, I want to say 14 or 16 months of their project, but they kept growing their team, and it finally reached a point where they were needing like $30,000 a month from us, and it was like, and we were also trying to grow our internal teams, and so it was like, I don't think we can afford to keep giving this team $30,000 a month. So what we did is we worked out a deal with Interplay for Interplay to become the new publisher for Descent. But I remember seeing all the original 3D coding for that game, and because that game is all about like going through tunnels and with full 6-degree freedom of movement, really cool technology. We had them come down to Dallas to meet with us, and then we took them over to meet with id Software for an afternoon, and they were talking to John Carmack, and there was a lot of great information going back and forth. And John was really impressed with them. So this was a game that I was really excited for, but the cost just kept going up, and we never got a chance to see it through to its release. But so that's one that I kind of wish that we could have kept funding and released it ourselves.
Well, that's awesome. I had no idea you had a part in Descent. That was one of my favorite games that I really enjoyed. It was up there. I played a lot of hours in the 90s on that game, and as I recall, it was modem play too. So you could I remember calling up my friends, and we would tie up the phone line and battle it out. But it was a great game. Well, man, you've got you've got a part in so many great hits from back then, and hopefully many more to come.
Thank you.
Scott, thanks for joining us.
You bet, Jesse. Anytime.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.